1,000 better
1,000
stories.
better stories.
1,000 better stories. You're listening to 1,000 Better Stories, the Scottish Communities Climate Action Network's podcast sharing stories of community-led climate action in Scotland to help us all imagine the better and fairer future and transform what we think is possible. Hello, it's Kaska, your story weaver. Welcome to the bonus episode related to the story from the GO Torry event, which we published last week. One of the most ambitious outcomes from the Tory People's Assembly in Aberdeen last year is a plan to retrofit housing in Torry. It's now become even more urgent as problems with deteriorating rack concrete mean 500 homes may be at risk of being demolished. Listen to last week's episode to find out more about the context for this idea. Today, I'm sharing a recording of a talk by Retrofit coordinator Matthew Clubb, which he gave during the GO Torry event at the Bridge Centre. This goes into more technical details on retrofitting with some specific local examples. As a relative novice to the concept, I found it a great primer to the process, which made me seriously consider going through it myself for my own home. I hope some of you will find it equally informative. I've since learned that there are a number of community-driven organisations who are working in several areas of Scotland to bring people together to overcome the challenges of making our homes fit for the future. There's Nesfit in Aberdeenshire, which Matthew is involved in, Locker Home Retrofit in Glasgow, and Edinburgh in Edinburgh. I've linked their websites in the episode notes for you. Without further ado, let's hear from Matthew.
For those who don't know me, I'm Matthew Clubb. I run an architecture and retrofit business here in Aberdeen. We have an office on Union Street. I've been working with the Torry Assembly to talk about the potential of retrofit in Torry, which is fundamentally about how we have better housing. So I'm just going to basically talk about the retrofit project as a whole. I'm going to just explain what is retrofit, why retrofit, what have we been doing, and what are the next steps. Okay, so fundamentally the retrofit project is about the future. It's thinking about, what will Torry look like in 2045 or even 2035. What's our housing going to look like in the context of fuel poverty, in the context of the transition, in the context of the cost of living, and in the context of the climate crisis. So as much as this is talking about insulation and improving our homes, for me it's also about the spaces between buildings, and that's what talks to the wider community engagement. Because the opportunities for me here are not just that we have cheaper bills, but that we live in better homes that are fit for the future, that actually create local jobs, create local prosperity in a way that enhances the community. So the Torry Retrofit project, at the moment we've set it out in four kind of phases, and at the moment we're just at the start of it. So we're trying to engage with the community as much as possible. I do a lot of presentations like this. I actually run a community group in my own village in Davitt, where I do a lot of similar things. We're trying to do some sample retrofit plans. So on the table over here today, you'll see some sample retrofit plans that I'm going to talk through. We're trying to look at the opportunities, if there are any, with the rack situation. Are there any ways that what we're doing could help the rack situation? We're also looking at health. So some of the homes that we've been surveying in Torry, we're actually going to monitor things like air quality and living temperatures and things like that, because there's actually huge health implications for improving our housing. And the final one at the bottom there is about stakeholder outreach. So we're trying to engage with the council, we're trying to engage with other community groups, also trying to engage with energy companies and financial institutions, because we, this is a big challenge and it needs lots of input from lots of stakeholders. So phase one, we're just sort of almost coming to the end of it. Phase zero. Phase one would be going a bit wider. So at the moment we've done 3 retrofit plans for 3 different types of houses, but there's lots more different types of housing in Torry, and we need to think about how, if we were to improve all the housing on a kind of street by street basis, we'd need a design for doing that. So that would also look much more at the sort of finance side of things and how we build financial models for all this. Then phase 2 would actually be doing something, running a pilot project. And for me, this is about taking a street and saying, right, let's improve all the houses on this street, all in a oneer, and let's think about the spaces between the buildings as well. And then we do that project, make sure it's done right, learn as much as possible, such that eventually we can have a street by street rollout of all the other streets in Torry. So that's the general kind of what we're trying to work towards and what we're trying to get funding for. But the big question is, like, why are we doing this? And for me, there's just a huge opportunity in this. First of all, it's about the health benefits. My team go into homes across Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire all the time, and we're seeing damp and mould in people's homes, and just a lot of bad indoor air quality. A lot of people, they've got a whacking great gas boiler or oil boiler in their home, but they still just actually struggle to heat their homes. Particularly the old granite homes. So, and all of this takes its toll. A report last year from the Building Research Establishment showed that something like 40% of the costs of our NHS, running our NHS, can be attributed to the state of our buildings. 40%. Now, don't get me wrong, that's not all about energy efficiency. I think the top figure is actually about trips and falls. But there is a huge amount that can be done to our housing to reduce the burden on our NHS. And last year, for the first time, a death certificate for a young lad in England was registered, the cause of death being black mould, because a lot of people are just tolerating these conditions, and it's very bad for respiratory health, among other things. So yeah, the health benefits of better housing is phenomenal. Jobs is the next one. The just transition, we're all hearing that phrase at the moment, and of course, the oil and gas industry is talking about, being careful and all this stuff. But for me, if we are going to meet our climate objectives and we're going to meet the Scottish Government's heat and building strategy, that heat and building strategy requires every home in Aberdeen to have an EPC of C in 10 years' time. That's 200 houses every week that we need to retrofit, starting now. 200 houses every week. We need an army of people. That's 4,000 jobs if we want it. Realistically in Aberdeen, the oil industry only really sort of supports 10,000 direct jobs. So, for me, that's a huge opportunity, working in our local communities. Fuel poverty. The Energy Savings Trust, I don't know if anyone's heard of the Energy Savings Trust. They were set up by the government 30 years ago, and they provide grants and loans. But the Energy Savings Trust has been around all that time, and actually fuel poverty has only gone up in this country, especially with the recent price rises in energy. 30% of Scotland is thought to be in fuel poverty now, where people are spending more than 10% of their household income on their energy bills. So, for me, street by street retrofit is going to solve that. And then we've got other things, other bigger picture of things. The Climate Change Act of Scotland, requires us to be reaching net zero by 2045 and halving our emissions by 2030. There's a lot of politics going on about whether that's achievable or not, but we've got to do it. And climate change isn't just about reducing emissions; it's also thinking about how the changing climate in the future is going to affect us. So getting ready for adapting to other things like hotter summers, drier summers. So overheating in buildings will become more of a risk. And so the main thing I really want to get across here is that the government is, set itself lots of really stringent objectives to meet climate change targets, and they're putting money towards it. They're not putting enough money towards it yet, but they should be, and hopefully they will be. And this is all part of trying to address that as well. And the final point I've got on this slide here is about the national grid, right? So decarbonising is largely about electrifying everything. So electric cars, electric buses, electric homes. But the national grid have told us that if we're going to electrify everything, we need to have some efficiency on the way, because otherwise we'll need 3 times as many wind turbines and so on. So, if we can reduce the energy use in our homes, then we should be doing it. So another big case for why we should be retrofitting our homes and improving our homes is that we can't build ourselves out of this situation. So this graph shows the emissions from building a house and then at the end of its life, demolishing it. So you can see that if we build a new house, in the short term we create this huge spike in emissions, which is accounts for 60% of the emissions of that building over its whole life. So, we can't just demolish all the existing houses and build new, because we'll blow our carbon budget right away. So, and if we think forward to 2050, 2045, even with all the house building we need to do, 80% of the homes that will exist in 2050 have already been built. So we've got to upgrade our existing homes. But the other one, if we're thinking about it in Torry, we've got 500 homes that are affected by RAC. If we cannot, all these things I've been talking about are all reasons why we should not be demolishing those houses. But actually, what about the social impacts of all this? We're already seeing some of the RAC houses being boarded up. How does that make you feel when you walk down the street? What are we doing to our community if we're going to lose 10% of our community? There's a huge social impact here that we need to consider as well. So how do we do it? How do we do retrofit? So energy efficiency is one of these things that in the past it's not been done very well. And in 2015, the UK government commissioned a report called the Bondfield Review, which looked at where all those projects had gone wrong. And it came out with 3 recommendations. One was a consumer charter, one was a code of conduct for the industry, and the other one was a standard for managing retrofit. And that standard is beautifully called Past 2035. But it outlines a really robust process for how you improve housing. And we call that the whole house retrofit process. And one of the things that's key in that process is having what's called a retrofit coordinator. So I'm trained as a retrofit coordinator, and so are some of my team. And that is basically about having someone who oversees the process. Because if you want to improve the energy efficiency of your home at the moment, how do you do it? You normally go to a builder or maybe a double glazing salesman, but the problem there is they're always trying to sell you something. There's this vested interest, and we've seen a lot of people doing not so good things. So a retrofit coordinator is someone independent who can basically, make sure things are put in right, make sure that things are done that the householder wants, and ultimately achieves the goals that they set out to achieve. So there's a process for doing this. An introduction, a really robust house survey that normally takes 3 or 4 hours, an energy assessment, an evaluation of all the things you could do. But the most important step for me here is a retrofit plan. So that's what we've tried to produce so far on this project, is retrofit plans, because this is expensive and it's going to take a long time, and most people can't afford to do all of it. So let's break it down into chunks. Over the next 10, 15 years, what can we do step by step? Where can we get funding from? What grants are available? But let's do things in the right order. Make the house more energy efficient, and then eventually change the heating system for something with no emissions. Then once we've got a retrofit plan, we'll come up with a solution, have it installed, and then afterwards we have a period of monitoring to make sure that what has been installed is doing what it said it would. So, and this is what a retrofit plan looks like. Numerous stages, bringing the energy efficiency down. And one of the other things I do is run a cooperative called Nesfit, North East Scotland Retrofit Hub. And we are campaigning for every home in the North East to have a retrofit plan. Because if you have a retrofit plan, you know how much it's going to cost, how long it's going to take, how much energy you'll need at the end of it, how many jobs you'll create, and so on and so on. So, yeah. So, onto the Torry. So, we've done 4 retrofit plans for 4 buildings in Torry, and the first one is the building you're sitting in right now. So, I'm not going to talk too much about that. We've got some separate slides, and there'll be a report issued on that. We made an energy model of the building, and we found that the largest source of energy loss in this building is ventilation losses. So that's drafts, but drafts that happen all the time, day and night, without you knowing them. Then the roof and the walls are the next biggest, and we've come up with a plan that can basically reduce the energy loss from this building by 80%. And when we do this, we spend a lot of time in a building. So I had a team of 3 guys in here for I think 3 or 4 hours. We conducted what's called a blower door test. So that's how we know we're losing 30%. We blow and suck on the building to find out how leaky it is. We look at the ventilation systems. We look for where there's insulation, or in this case where it isn't, and we do smoke testing to hunt the leaks down. So yeah, and we basically try and work to these 6, identify all the losses through these 6 principles. But I'm going to talk more about the housing, because I think that's what we're all really more interested in. So we've done 3 homes of different sort of types, and we've tried to pick housing that's, that we can all relate to. So the first one here is on Grampian Road. It's a mid-terraced house with room and roof, granite walls, a timber roof. It's got double glazing. Really typical, right? We all know someone who lives in a house like this. And when we're looking at a home, so I've cut a slice through the building. This is a section. What I want to see in this building, for good energy efficiency, is a good, strong line of insulation going right the way around the building. And it's all about the junctions. How do those junctions work? Do we have continuous insulation all the way around the building? But what we found with this house is that we've got a bit of insulation in the glazing, we've got some insulation in the roof, but other than that, there's very little. So the floor is completely uninsulated. There's lots of drafts come through these suspended floors. The air tightness is pretty terrible. There's lots of gaps in the floorboards. There's a loft hatch with no seals on it. There's all sorts of service penetrations, pipes going through walls that aren't sealed. Sparkies and plumbers are the bane of my life. They wreck buildings quite. Sorry if you're a sparky or a plumber, but there's better ways of doing it than what we're seeing here. So all this contributes to just losses that, the problem with these is we talk about drafts, but these happen all the time, and you might not feel them as drafts, but on a cold day, if when you heat the house, you get what's called buoyancy losses, where if air can get in at the bottom, the hot air will rise up and it will escape out the top of the house. So in this house, the suspended floor is letting air come through the bottom, and then the leaky loft hatch is letting the air escape out the top. And then on a windy day, you get something called infiltration losses, where literally the wind just blows through the house. We all can all relate to that. But it can be really significant. The next topic in this house is about ventilation. So we didn't know that it's quite musty upstairs in this house, and we think we know why, because they've got an extractor fan in the bathroom, in the shower, but it's a cheap one that you get from a DIY store. And when we got in the loft to look at the ducts, it's one of these flexi ducts, and there's kinks in the pipework, and essentially the fan isn't doing what it needs to be doing. So that's leading to an accumulation of moisture, mustiness, all that kind of thing. And there's much better systems we can have than just these kinds of fans. The glazing in this house is okay. The windows were not so old. So double glazing is okay. We would always recommend that you go for triple glazing in the long term, but ultimately windows are so expensive that you only really should replace them when the existing ones are failing on you. And the last one's building services. So we see this a lot. I think the client was having some work done at this time, so maybe they've lagged these pipes now, but I'm going to bet that maybe not. but always lagging pipes. Yeah. So ultimately, all those observations, we've now come up with suggestions for how you could improve the energy on this home, and breaking it down into steps, which is always the best way to do it. Start off by looking at the loft and the floor insulation, because those you can do without any disruption. You can get in the loft and do it properly. You can get under the floor and do it properly. The roof insulation later would be stage 2, where you'd have to remove some of the plaster, so that'd be quite disruptive. And then step 3 would be to upgrade the wall insulation and the windows downstairs. Again, because this is a granite building, you're probably going to be putting insulation internally, so you're looking at replastering, quite disruptive. But the most important thing is to do it in stages. So, it might be that after insulating the floor and the loft, we get more than 6%, which would be great. But ultimately, you monitor between each stage, and eventually you could reduce the energy loss by 85%. But the other really key thing about this graph for me, we're showing the emissions coming down as well. So at the moment, this house is sitting at about 14 degrees average winter temperature. And if we insulated and made the building airtight and put in good ventilation systems, not only would we reduce the energy consumption, but we would increase the internal temperature with less energy. So we're up to 19 degrees. So, comfort, healthy environment, and all that sort of stuff in the long term. Okay, so the second plan we did was for a flat, first floor flat, and I won't go into too much detail here, but this has got some insulation in the loft, but look at the state of it. It's horrendous. The cables going everywhere, and it's all just. We see this all the time where insulation has been put in, but it's then later disrupted by a sparky or a plumber normally. And, really, people store stuff on it and it's a mess. It can be done much better, and this really does degrade the effectiveness of all that insulation. We get what's called thermal bypass. So we can do a lot to improve that. And actually, half the time it's actually about thinking about storage, putting loft legs in, making sure if someone needs to get to that fan in the bathroom over here because it's broken in the future, we need an access plank designed in with the insulation to make sure that the insulation doesn't get disrupted in the future, if that makes sense. The other thing about this house was the drafts. So this home had a gas fireplace that was removed, and it was in obviously a chimney breast. It was removed and a vent put in and covered over. But when the gas pipe went through a cupboard to feed that gas fire, they left part of the gas pipe in, and this whacking great hole that also goes through to the chimney. And we haven't done a blower door test on this house yet. This was it was quite a nice day actually. It was quite sunny, and then the heating wasn't on in the house either. But we got a smoke pencil out, and you can just see how much air is getting sucked through there. All day long, 24 hours a day, any warm air that's in that house is just getting sucked straight up the chimney through the back of that cupboard. So, sealing things like that is quite easy and quite cost effective to do actually. It's just the attention to detail of knowing to do it. So yeah, no, we're done with that, thank you. The other problem with this house is it didn't have any ventilation in the bathroom. Huge accumulations of moisture. I mean, what a mess. Real shame. Of course, terrible indoor air quality. So again, we've outlined a plan to, first of all, increase the loft insulation. Then, with this house, really, because the rooms aren't so big, you don't want to lose too much space by insulating internally. And actually, it makes more sense and it's more cost effective to insulate the walls externally. So doing that would make a huge saving. And you would try and do the whole building all at once. Improve the ventilation, longer term, improve the windows, 85% in the longer run. And again, look at the indoor temperature just creeping up. Much more comfortable, much healthier building. Okay, and so the last home I'm going to show you is on Balnagas Road. It's one of the houses which has a rack in the roof. And I'm not going to go through all the details, but suffice to say, it's the same kind of picture where we know that we can put much more insulation in and around this building to save 80% ultimately, and we can increase the internal temperatures and we can make it a healthier building. But obviously the rack situation really needs to be considered here. So what we've said is that at stage 1, if rather than just replacing the roof, you replaced it with a really well insulated roof, you could potentially save 30, maybe 40% of the energy. And this building already has cavity wall insulation, but cavity wall insulation is okay, but you can do a lot more. So you can put more insulation on the walls, and so that's what we're saying in stage 3 is actually you could increase the insulation on the walls as well. But obviously the rack situation is dominating a lot of what we're talking about here today. So I just want to expand on this a little bit. We've done a little bit of investigation into what the council have been getting advice on, and we've extracted this from the engineer's report that's available online. I'm sure lots of you have probably seen it already, and they've been looking at 5 options for addressing the rack situation. So the first is simply supporting with some new elements, simply supporting the roof panels. The second is a complete secondary support structure that's installed from underneath. The third is partial replacement of damaged panels. And the fourth is a complete replacement of the roof. The fifth option is demolition, but really, for all those reasons I was talking about earlier, demolition should not be really even on the table in my book, but yeah. And so what we've done is tried to say, well, what would happen if we considered, if we could get funding from all these kind of other sources, what could we do? What is the potential here? So in this scenario, I think these two, you'd end up treating them the same. I would build a complete structure under the roof and insulate it. It's not an ideal solution because you do end up with some thermal bridges at these junctions, at these corners. I don't really see how replacing individual panels is feasible, and the last option is complete roof replacement. And just totally thinking out of the box about what could be possible is that potentially, if you're replacing the roof, not only replace it with a roof that's fully insulated and airtight, but you could incorporate solar panels into it, you could incorporate a ventilation system into it, and you could do one solution straight there and then. The other thing you could consider as part of a longer term retrofit plan is how you make the roof tie in with the other junctions. So let's say we were going to do a deep retrofit and install external wall insulation. We could design this roof to extend further than it does at the moment to make sure that it overlaps with the insulation on the walls at a later date. And another even consideration about this is that in the longer term, with the climate changing, we do potentially need to look at overheating in buildings. So because we're going to get hotter, drier summers, overheating could be an issue. And in this instance, overheating normally occurs because you've got too much south-facing glazing, and that the building can't get rid of that heat. But if you were to extend the roof, you could provide shading for the south-facing windows that would help combat that too. So there's lots of different solutions that could be wrapped up into one step, if that makes sense. And I know obviously this is a really difficult situation and we need to work out how we're going to pay for it, but this has been done before. So this is a company called Energy Sprong. They started as a Dutch company and they're now done this project in Nottingham, and they make retrofit insulation panels in a factory off-site. So this row of houses was insulated, retrofitted in the period of a few weeks. The tenants didn't move out, they stayed in the home the whole time. The costs came down because they manufactured these panels are all the same, mass manufacture in a factory brought costs down, and they incorporated the solar panels in the factory, so everything was just craned on in a period of days. There was one day where they changed the windows, but basically they did a deep retrofit on these houses. And the most impressive thing about this is actually how they paid for it. So this was paid for by the energy company, and what they did was gave the tenants the retrofit for free. And obviously, because they've done this retrofit, they've reduced the energy demand of the home. And they said to the tenants, well, we're just going to ask you to basically pay the same energy bills before and after. And if you can afford your energy bills before, theory would be that you could afford them afterwards. But because they reduced the energy demand, it was like an overpayment, and that went back to eventually long-term paying back the money that the energy company had put in for doing the work. So there are other projects like this underway at the moment. There's a company in London working called Pineapple, which is a financial entity that are partnering with an energy company to do something similar on houses in Hounslow. I talk to these kinds of entities quite often, and we'll be investigating whether we could do something similar in Torry. Full disclosure, I've not yet had any interaction with the council. I was hoping for a meeting this week, but it didn't take place. Hopefully I'll get a chat with them next week. But obviously I know there's a lot of emotion wrapped around on this, and we're really, the picture of how we pay for any of this is really unclear. But when I do get to talk to the council, my standpoint is going to be that I just, please let's look at this. I mean, maybe they're looking at it already and they haven't told you, but if they haven't, then I'm going to suggest that and see what other partners we can work with to see if there's a solution. So yeah, next steps really is about engaging with the council, engaging with you. Ultimately, we need to gather more data as well. So, there's 500 RAC affected houses. Most of them have had various modifications and changes made over the years. Ultimately, every house is going to need a plan of some sort, a retrofit plan of some sort. So that will need to happen at some point. But obviously, funding options is the main point we need to get onto next. I'll stop talking.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please give it a like and share it with others. It'll really help us reach a wider audience. If something exciting is happening in your own community, be sure to let us know so that we can help you tell your own story. You can drop our story weavers a line at stories@scan.scot. It's scan, SCCAN, .scot, SCOT. We also offer training and mini grant support to community storytellers. To keep up to date with our offerings and everything Scan, check out our website at scan.scot or find us on Twitter, Facebook or Instagram, or simply sign up to the newsletter.